In the topsy-turvy, turned around world that is life after divorce, we often do some rather strange things in an attempt to regain a sense of control and dominion over our own lives. Do any of these sound familiar to you? One of the things that we do is we obsessively snoop and sleuth. And this was my preferred method during that window between when my ex left and the legal divorce. I would obsessively check his other wife's blog because I somehow had this feeling that if I knew where he was and what he was doing, that I had some kind of control over my life and over the outcome of this whole thing. And it was so weird going from this life with daily contact with him to, well, none. And so, in essence, I kept up this one sided relationship for months. Now, the problem with this is that information can become addictive. I found myself kind of getting this little zing, this almost high as new information came in. And I would feel, well, almost defeated when there wasn't any new information. And then I was allowing whatever that data was to dictate how I was going to feel for that day. So what was so crazy is that while I was engaging in this behavior, looking for a sense of control, I was actually allowing that information to control me. Another thing that can happen is that people can find themselves in a role where they are giving advice to their ex. Now, this isn't one that I've personally experienced, but I've worked with so many people that have, where they find themselves in an advice giving role to their ex, even almost up to an informal life coach. And I get this. I mean, it's a comfortable relationship because one, it maintains that connection, and it also gives the advice giver a sense of control. And the advice taker is allowed to sort of stay in that helpless place. And I get this. After all, it's so hard to see them moving on. And so by giving them advice, you can feel like you have some sort of control over what their life looks like. And for them, well, it can be comfortable because it keeps them in sort of a helpless place. And for both of you, it maintains that connection at least for a little while longer. But this is going to be short-lived because at some point they're either going to start seeking advice elsewhere or they're going to simply ignore the advice. And then for you, well, you're going to realize that even though you can advise, you cannot mandate. So that control is really just an illusion. Another way that we can try to control things is by assigning labels. And nowhere is this more clear than in the current label of narcissist. And we do this because we feel like if we can just assign that name to something, that then we can understand the entirety of it. And we feel like then we have some sort of ownership over it. And labels can be powerful. They are often one of the steps in understanding things, coming to terms with things, and releasing them. But labels are also sort of a shorthand. It's almost like a Cliff Notes. It's not the entirety of a thing. It's just part of it. Another way that we try to control things is by applying very rigid rules. Things like, I cannot date again until it has been exactly 1 year since the divorce, or I will never allow myself to trust again. Now, rules have their place. Guidelines are important, but when they're too rigid or too inflexible, it's really a sign of us trying to control things. Sometimes having too many options becomes overwhelming, and so we artificially prune them in order to make them feel more manageable. Now, by all means, give yourself some guidelines to color within, but also make them flexible enough to give yourself room to grow. We also like to allocate blame. We see ourselves sometimes as the judge, the most powerful person in the courtroom, handing down judgments. By casting blame, it helps us feel as though we are the one calling the shots. And sometimes blame can actually be empowering. The acceptance of some painful truth can be sort of a starting point, but it can also become limiting, a trap that holds you back from deeper introspection and the ability to make changes. I think sometimes we feel that by blaming other people, we can gain some sort of reassurance that this won't happen again. But really, the best assurances come from within. Sometimes people try to control things by micromanaging the kids. Now, co-parenting is no joke. Just as you feel like you've gotten this whole parenting thing figured out, now you have to trust your ex with the kids. And there's a lot of fear in that fear of letting your kids out of your sight, that fear of that other parent making choices that may be different than the ones that you would make. The fear that maybe the kids don't need you as much as you want them to. The fear of letting go before you're ready. And the response to all of that fear is so often trying to control every little thing, from the color of the shirts that the kids are wearing to exactly what they eat for breakfast. But kids need room to grow, and the other parent needs space to figure out their own relationship with the kids. And this is where trust comes in. Figure out those things that are really important and pay attention to those, and let the rest go. Sometimes a sense of control comes from looking for reasons why. And this is slightly different than the others because we want the world to make sense. And so when it doesn't, when fairness isn't happening, we struggle to understand how that can be. And so we're looking for answers. It's just like the kid taking the back off of a watch to see how all of the mechanisms work underneath. We want the world to have that same sort of order and certainty, but it doesn't. And no matter how much we look, there's never going to be that satisfactory answer that makes everything fall into place. Instead, there's just going to be a whole lot of who knows. Sometimes we seek a sense of control by obsessing over our ex's new partner. And we tell ourselves that we need to know everything there is about them because it's somehow important to us. But I think we also do it because it's a distraction from our own pain. Because if we can focus on them, we don't have to focus on ourselves. In other words, obsessing over the new partner is a way that we try to control our own emotions. Sometimes we try to control things by diving into the court battle. So you've accepted that you can't change the past. You have finally accepted that you can't change your ex's behavior, but you can still control your attorney as long as you still sign the checks. Now, sometimes this is done offensively, where you are constantly putting your ex and their attorney on the defensive, but it can also be done much more passively by simply delaying your response to certain things or refusing to sign paperwork. But ultimately, only the attorneys and their wallets benefit from this bid for control. And then finally, another way that we seek control is by changing the external. This is the divorce remodel or the post-breakup haircut. We joke about these things because they're true. So often when we feel like our life is out of control, we seek to change something in our appearance or in our environment that gives us that little sense of power, that little sense of, I can at least have influence over this. And that's actually one of the healthier ways to gain a sense of control after divorce. Just make sure you also keep control over your spending.